Good afternoon. My name is Jeffrey Katz. That's Jeffrey Katz, and I am the Chief of the Chesterfield County, Virginia Police Department. I appreciate you joining us this afternoon. Just wanted to give you a brief update, some supplemental information to an officer-involved shooting that you all reported on back in January. Specifically, it was January 14th. And I'm going to run you through some of the information relating to the shooting, and then I'll get into the supplemental information, just so for background that you have it. On January 13th, 2001, Mr. Jeffrey Kite appeared in Chesterfield County Court on a matter involving a female. That female had a protective order for Mr. Kite. It was not in effect at the time of the court appearance. However, after the court appearance, Mr. Kite approached this young lady outside. He made several comments to her that caused her concern, enough concern that she contacted us. He had some tracking equipment on his phone indicating where she was, and that was, of course, of great concern to her and to us. Our officers secured warrants for Mr. Kite for violation of the protection order, and at 4 p.m. responded to Lands Mill Drive, where Mr. Kite resided in a trailer. When the officers arrived to the location on Lands Mill Drive, they saw Mr. Kite, he saw them, he ran into his trailer and barricaded himself inside the trailer. And that started a significant standoff. So there was a female that was inside the trailer that came out at some point, and she indicated that Mr. Kite told her that he was going to, quote, go out with a bang, end quote. The officers learned that Mr. Kite was watching them via closed-circuit television cameras that he had set up around his trailer. And finally, at about 5 minutes after midnight on the next day, so that 4 o'clock we show up to serve the warrant, we're talking about 5 minutes after midnight the next day, after numerous unsuccessful attempts to negotiate Mr. Kite out of his residence, we decided to breach the door to his trailer, and we introduced a robot into the trailer to try to identify the location of Mr. Kite, reestablish contact. That was unsuccessful. 5 minutes later, we introduced a drone into the trailer. Again, in an attempt to reintroduce contact with him. That was also unsuccessful. About 30 minutes later, at 12:40, we introduced gas into the residence in an attempt to compel Mr. Kite to leave the residence. He did not. At that point, there was some concern that maybe he had escaped through the floor of the trailer. We sent in a second drone at 12:52. We used some thermal imagery at 2:07 a.m., thinking that maybe he had concealed himself in a dryer. That proved fruitless. At 2:20, we introduced a robot to actually physically check the dryer. We did everything we could to ensure that we were making contact with Mr. Kite, that we wanted Mr. Kite to come out, we wanted him to come out peacefully. And at this point, we saw no sign that Mr. Kite was in his residence. So the only option that we had left was to send people in and try to find whether or not Mr. Kite was in his residence or whether he had escaped through the floor. At 2:57 a.m., officers made entry into Mr. Kite's residence. And at 2:59 a.m., Mr. Kite made a fateful decision to ambush our officers. He laid in wait underneath the bottom of this captain's bed. The officers entered the room, the diagram I showed you on the floor behind you. The officers cleared the room. One officer opened a swinging door at the bottom of the bed to clear underneath the bed, and upon doing so, Mr. Kite took 2 shots at that officer's head with a handgun. This is a picture not of the exact gun, but of the exact model handgun that was used by Mr. Kite. Again, he took 2 shots at the head of one of our officers, one of our SWAT officers, and as I said, he had concealed himself within this piece of furniture, so there was no clear location of where he was within this piece of furniture. So the officers fired into the piece of furniture. They unloaded 47 rounds into this piece of furniture. He was struck with graze wounds 24 different times. So about half the rounds fired at the piece of furniture ended up striking Mr. Kite. The medical examiner, upon doing an autopsy of Mr. Kite, who did not survive the encounter, attributed his death to the totality of the wounds. Not any single wound was a fatal wound. So the rounds that were fired into Mr. Kite ultimately caused his death, but it certainly caused him to stop shooting at our officers. And unfortunately, that's an outcome that we didn't want, but frankly, Mr. Kite chose. It's a reasonable expectation to believe that if you fire on police officers, we will fire back. We never look to start a gunfight, but certainly we will end it if one erupts in our presence. So with that and the context of the shooting incident itself, I want to share with you that as part of the follow-up for this investigation, I asked our investigative staff to work with our partners in the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms to find out how Mr. Kite came upon the firearm that he used to try to kill one of my officers. Through an investigation with ATF, we were able to learn that on January 1st, a Miss Angela House of Chesterfield County purchased a firearm, a 9mm firearm, the 9mm firearm used to fire on my officers in Henrico County. The matter was brought before a federal grand jury who indicted her for making false statements and for aiding and abetting a convicted felon in possessing a firearm. So, first thing I want to do is I want to thank the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and the U.S. Attorney's Office for championing this cause. I want to remind members of our public that it is a crime to engage in a straw purchase. It is a crime to purchase a firearm or to furnish a firearm to a convicted felon. It is irresponsible, and you should not be giving a firearm to someone who is a convicted felon, who is suffering from mental illness, who is addicted to drugs. These are bad practices, and they do not serve well the person that you are giving the firearm to. It certainly did not work out well for Mr. Kite, and it could have had very tragic consequences to our officers. So Ms. House is facing those federal charges. And there are a couple things that I think that also we should remind the public about. And the first one is stalking. Stalking is wrong. Frankly, it's creepy, it's illegal, and it's absolutely ineffective in interpersonal relationships. So, people don't need a police chief giving them dating advice, but if they're not into you, walk away from them, maintain your dignity, and move on. If you violate a protective order, we're going to charge you. Second thing is, again, don't put a gun, irresponsibly put a gun in the hands of someone who shouldn't have it. That includes leaving a gun unattended in a car, leaving a gun unattended somewhere else. Secure your firearms. It is a right, but it is also a responsibility. And we want to make sure that people understand that. And again, if someone chooses to shoot at a Chesterfield County police officer, expect that a Chesterfield County police officer will return fire. We don't want to be involved in a gunfight, but we absolutely will take care of business if we have to. And finally, I want to thank our officers, our detectives, our forensic investigators, and our ECC staff, who all did their part during this shooting incident. I haven't had an opportunity to publicly thank them because of the fact that we had this supplemental investigation and we don't talk about active investigations. I want to thank our SWAT negotiations personnel who managed the standoff, our fire rescue personnel who supported it, again, our federal partners with ATF and our Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia. And finally, and most importantly, I want to thank the two officers who put themselves in harm's way for the young lady while they were serving the warrant on her behalf. Make no mistake about it, this was a very difficult incident for them. It was a tragic day in their lives. It was a difficult day in their lives. And the reality is the men and women of this profession come to work every day in an effort to do good for others. We do not come into this profession with the intention of ever having to take a human life, although we understand that it could happen and it could happen to us. These officers acted heroically, they acted bravely, and I want to let you know that I support their actions 100%, and I appreciate the work that they did and the support that their families have shown both of them. With that, I will take any questions that you may have. Yes, sir.
Chief Bill Atkinson with Progress Mason Road. The woman who was charged, is she, how is she related in any way to Mr. Katz, or what's their acquaintance?
I don't have any connection in terms of their lineage, and so I wouldn't want to speculate on any relation that they may have.
Can you help me understand the evidence? First of all, when you made your way in, I think you said he ambushed the officer?
That's correct.
And then they hid at the bed?
No. He laid in wait under the bed, concealing his presence. When the officers attempted to open the underneath of the bed to see whether he was in there, that's when he took the opportunity to fire 2 shots at the head of one of my SWAT officers.
How was the officer?
I'm sorry?
How was the officer hurt?
The officer was not struck, so the officer did not suffer any physical injuries. But as I said, you know, the unfortunate action of having to take a human life weighs heavy on anyone's good heart, and these are not easy times for either one of these officers.
A couple questions about, excuse me, the timeline here.
Yes, sir.
Follow up as well. Could you say explicitly what felony charges Mr. Katz was facing and when, and were they related to that initial warrant for the stalking situation?
So he was already a convicted felon, but we had warrants on him for stalking of the young lady, or violation of the protection order, I should say, of the young lady out in front of the courthouse when he reapproached her after they went before the judge.
What felony charges had he previously been charged with?
I don't have that information. I can just tell you he was a convicted felon.
When did Miss, and I missed her first name, if you could repeat that. Ms.
Sure.
Katz's first name?
Angela,
Angela, she's from Henrico County.
Chesterfield.
Chesterfield County.
The firearm was purchased in Henrico County.
When was that firearm purchased?
It was purchased on January 1st, so roughly 2 weeks prior to the incident.
Is Angela House the same woman who Mr. Katz had approached outside of the court?
She is not.
She's not the one who he had allegedly stalked?
No. Yeah. Good question, though.
Inside the trailer, when the standoff first began, there's a woman inside that police escorted out at one point in the beginning.
I don't believe so. I don't believe that was Ms. House.
Was it the initial big stalking?
No. No.
Chief, are the 2 officers, are they back on the force? They couldn't be stated. I'm sure they were.
Oh,
And while the investigation was going on, they are back on the force.
oh, yes, sir. You know, when we initially reported the shooting, not in great detail because it was still an active investigation, but they were placed on administrative leave as is normal protocol to make sure that, one, that the actions were within the law and within administrative procedure, and 2, that they were still okay and suitable to go out and continue to serve in their proper capacity, and both are back on duty.
Chief, about the shooting itself and the response from your own officers, how did you know that Mr. Katz had fired at the head of one of your own? Was that sober counting, or was the body camera video to look back at?
There is body camera video, and it's readily apparent. You actually see the officer as he's opening the door. You can hear the pop, pop, and you can see him swing his head back in rapid succession.
Is your office going to release that?
We're not going to release it to the public, but we will make it viewable to the media if anybody wants to come in. We, again, as our practice is, we don't release body-worn camera video out publicly, but we are more than, we've made the invitation to the Mr. Katz's family's attorney to come in and take a look at the video, and certainly our media partners are welcome to do that as well.
Last question I have is, how many officers fired those 47 total shots into that?
2 officers. 2 officers. If you look at that layout of that room, not more than 2 officers really in full SWAT gear would be able to fit in that room and clear that room. Yeah.
Chief, what would you say to people who are saying that 2 shots resulting in 47, what would you say to those people who say that sounds like an ideal excessive?
I'd say get off your recliner and join a police department. Put yourself in a position where you have to put yourself in harm's way for someone else. Our officers don't get paid to die. They get paid to do good for others and make a difference. Our officers did that on that day. Mr. Kite cowardly decided to ambush my personnel, and as far as I'm concerned, you know, he got what he deserved.
You said this is almost to scale.
It is to scale. It is to scale.
My question is, how long did all this take place, from like the first drone going in to the officers going in?
I couldn't hear you. I apologize.
How long did this all take place, from like the first drone going in to when your officers went in? How long was he in there?
How long was he in there? He was in there since, when the officers arrived at a little after 4 p.m. He ran into the trailer, and he was in the trailer the entire time, until he was removed by the medical examiner.
At what time? Like, what time did your
Oh,
officers...
that would have been after the scene was,
Like, what time did he shoot at the officers?
that was at 2:59,
2:59?
2:59 a.m., yes.
How long roughly the time frame from when he fired the first shots to the other time when the officers returned fire? What sort of time frame were you looking at with that? Are you talking maybe a minute, 30 seconds?
In the amount of time that you've asked that question, the shooting is over. Yeah.
The woman who was inside ran out, I think you said? Did you say a woman ran out of the house?
A woman did leave the residence, yes.
But prior to that, you guys were trying to get whoever was in to open up.
That's
Was
correct.
she being charged with aiding or anything?
No. She was simply an inhabitant of the trailer, and she came out while we were trying to make contact with Mr. Kite, negotiate his safe removal from the home.
Chief, if you don't immediately know the connection between Ms. House and Mr. Kite and their potential relationship, does your department know why she gave him that gun in the first place?
I think that's a matter that really the U.S. Attorney's Office is going to have to establish in federal court, and I don't really want to get into the prosecution of their case or any of that nature. I am comfortable at this point releasing the information that I can release of what happened here in Chesterfield, but in terms of any specifics relating to their case, I wouldn't want to trample on their ability to prosecute this case.
So this is going to be heard in federal court?
That's correct.
Is there any use of any, like, thermal cameras?
Yes, sir. I think I mentioned that at 2:07, we deployed some thermal technology to look for heat signatures in the home.
And the wood just blocked them?
I can't speculate as to why it did or did not work, and I wouldn't really comment on any operational capacity beyond what I've already shared.
You also have a piece of furniture in possession?
I believe the furniture is in evidence. I do not have that information on me, but that's certainly something we can follow up and share with you. Yes.
Safe to say she was a resident of the area where she was,
My understanding, she is a resident of Chesterfield County.
Southern Chesterfield?
I don't, I guess technically, yes. Anybody else?
Just as a formality, can we make sure we get a list of the charges, exact charges that she is facing in the house?
Absolutely. Yeah, we can get that to you. Absolutely. All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate you coming and covering this.